The Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery. It's something I would say if I had absolute rocks for brains, guys. The Civil War was all about slavery, and it's so clear. And if you're wondering why you bring this up, July 4th weekend, because America's identity was not firmly identified in 1776. It is a constantly evolving battle, and there were multiple wars where we fought over what this American experiment, what democracy would look like, what a republic would look like. And I've got this copy, exact replica, of the Declaration of Independence here, and it says all men created equal. That's incongruent with racial oppression and slavery. Incongruent. So already people were pointing that out. The South took issue with this document because of that. They were like, that we can't have that because we need slavery. And they make it clear that this entire war is about slavery. Mississippi's secession document says this is for the preservation of slavery. Texas's secession document says this is for the preservation of white supremacy, for the subjugation of black people to white people. Incongruent with American identity, with America. And so they secede, treason. And this idea of the lost cause, that this was actually about states' rights and liberty, nonsense, doesn't even originate until after the Civil War, like 1866. It's ahistorical, meaning like invented after the fact and like not accurate. And it permeated throughout Southern education institutions like as propaganda, as white supremacist propaganda, to whitewash the Civil War. But it's nonsense. It was all about slavery. And the North was in this war. Well, the South started this war by seceding, but the North was in this war because they wanted to preserve the Union. Lincoln was elected, South immediately seceded, not even because he was an abolitionist. He wasn't. Only 5 to 10% of the North were abolitionists. That's for the immediate abolition of slavery today. That was considered pretty radical. Lincoln was a free soiler, morally against slavery, called it grotesque, wanted it to end, but he was a free soiler. Incrementalist change will diffuse it, will eventually get rid of it. But free soil meant as we expand west, manifest destiny, no more territories would be slave territories. That was too much for the South, so they seceded. And then you get into this conflict that is the bloodiest war in American history. 2% of the U.S. population will die. 700,000 people now is about the estimate, like 600 to 720,000. They keep revising it upward as years go on. And this is the first modern war. You've got Gatling guns, machine guns. You've got railroads. You've got the telegraph. You've got steamboats. So it's the first modern war. Some people call the Crimea War the first modern war, but that's neither here nor there. That's in Crimea. We're here. And so you're in these battles. It's not a foregone conclusion that the North will win because the South has a lower, like their goal is lower. They don't have to beat the North. They don't have to conquer the North. The North has to conquer the South. The South just has to make it so costly in lives and economics that Lincoln will become unpopular. That's their goal, shaping public opinion in the North, which has become radicalized against slavery for a few reasons. One, people like Frederick Douglass. He's an escaped slave. He becomes a prominent abolitionist. He gives lots of speeches. He points out the incongruencies with like these ideas of liberty and the existence of slavery, and he's exactly right. Books like Uncle Tom's Cabin. But the real thing that radicalizes people is the Fugitive Slave Act. So up leading to the Civil War, we have all these terrible presidents, some of the worst presidents ever. Lincoln's a good president, we have all these terrible presidents. And one of them, Miller Fillmore, passes the Fugitive Slave Act. So the North actually starts talking about states' rights here before the South. Because free states, if a black person who escaped slavery got there, they're free. Fugitive Slave Act was a compromise, morally dubious, disgusting one, that allowed slave hunters to go get people who had escaped and bring them back to be enslaved. And so northern people were seeing free black people that they knew yanked from their homes, dragged back to the South. Disgusting, horrible, radicalized people. And so the South is trying to make this war so costly that the public opinion would shift and they just want it to end. Also, the North had way more resources, so there was no way the South was going to win. The South was agrarian. It was all farming. The North was industrial, urbanizing, had all the manufacturing, had more people too. So the South was never going to win. Europe was not getting involved. Britain even gave the South belligerent status, which is like a quasi form of legitimacy in their cause, by the way. Bad. Because the South was exporting all of Britain, like giving all of Britain's cotton. And so this war is happening. Looks like the South is doing well at first because Robert E. Lee, the general of the South, is like lucky. He takes risks and he's lucky. He just is. And eventually, though, they're drawn to a draw at the Battle of Antietam. It's a draw. But they consider it a Union win because right after that, Lincoln's like, okay, I didn't want to do this from a position of weakness. I want to do this from a position of momentum and strength. Signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Slaves are free. I mean, they're not because the South is controlling, but it's a step forward that they will be free when this war ends. And that is wild to the South because they've twisted themselves into these incongruent moral paradoxes of like delusion and psychosis, that slavery is essential to civilization will collapse. Nonsense. After that, it's still like the battle is waging on. It's brutal. It's bloody. It's like people are dying of sickness. You know, you've got modern warfare, not modern medicine. So it's awful. Brother against brother. America's divided. Public opinion is like middling at many points for continuing the war in the North. But it all comes to a head in the Battle of Gettysburg. That's like really the high water mark of the Confederacy. And Lee makes a bad decision and risks, like he thinks if he can puncture the Union line and like break through, that if he can win a battle on Northern territory, because most of the battle was being fought in border states or states that were in the Union. Now, Maryland was like in the Union, but it was a slave state, and that's where a lot of battles were fought. So that was like Union, but it wasn't considered a northern state. Pennsylvania is. So you got this Battle of Gettysburg, fog, haze, artillery. The South has just like tried to fire at the Union line with their heavy artillery that you can't see. There's smoke. There's like different hills. So as they're like trying to go after they've done this bombardment to break the line, they're trying to get there. And what the South doesn't know is that most of the artillery has missed their mark. And as they try to break that line, the Union is able to push them back. And that's really the high watermark point. Because right as that's happening, Ulysses S. Grant, a future U.S. president, who's a general, is taking Vicksburg. Therefore, the Mississippi is controlled by the Union. Texas cut off Mississippi. Then you've got Sherman, another Union general, who's marching through Georgia and South Carolina, just utterly wrecking the Confederate troops there. And all of this is just to say that a sober reminder, multiple battles for the soul of this country. It was not immediately clear what type of country this would be. That's an evolving concept over time because it's an experiment. It's the story of progress, and it's a story of progress. Like, it just is. And you got to be sober about the history, about the moral stains that exist in this country. And you've also got to be optimistic about the future. And that's what learning history is about, and that's what the context of these things brings about.